I bought my land back in 2009, 12 quiet acres just outside a little town called Mercer Ridge, Tennessee, back when nobody wanted to live out there unless they liked open skies, coyotes howling at night, and driving 20 minutes just to buy milk. Honestly, that was exactly why I loved it. No HOA breathing down my neck. No neighbors timing how long my trash can sat near the curb. No fake luxury entrances with names like Whispering Pines slapped onto bulldozed farmland. Just dirt roads, old fences, and enough silence to hear yourself think. My property sat right between the county highway and a huge, undeveloped tract behind me. Around 45 acres of scrubland and trees that stayed untouched for years. I figured eventually somebody would buy it, maybe another farmer, maybe a hunter looking for recreational land, but I never expected what actually happened. One spring morning, I noticed orange survey flags tied along the tree line near the back fence. Then came the excavators, then dump trucks, then one giant polish sign planted near the roadside like somebody claiming territory in a war movie. Future home of Cedar Creek Estates. Yeah, that kind of neighborhood. Fake rustic branding, overpriced homes with gray siding, and people paying $500,000 to pretend they live in the countryside while complaining about frogs making noise at night. The developer's name was Brent Collier. Guy drove a black Range Rover so spotless it looked like it had never touched real dirt in its entire life. Funny thing is, Brent never introduced himself, never knocked on my door, never mailed a letter, nothing. I only knew his name because it was printed at the bottom of the project sign in giant gold letters like he was building a damn casino. At first I didn't think much of it, because common sense told me they must already have access figured out. Turns out, common sense and developers don't always travel together. One Monday I left before sunrise for a roofing job over in Dalton County. Long day, hot as hell, didn't get back home until close to 7. I remember turning onto my gravel driveway and immediately feeling something was wrong, because there were tire tracks everywhere, fresh mud pushed up near the edge of my field, dust still hanging in the air like somebody had just left minutes earlier. Then I saw it. A brand new gravel road cut straight across the front section of my property. 18 feet wide, compacted stone, graded smooth by professional equipment, running from the county highway all the way toward Brent's development site behind my land. I actually stopped my truck in the driveway and just stared at it for a solid minute because my brain couldn't process the audacity. These people had literally built a construction access road across private property without even speaking to the owner first. No paperwork. No easement, no permission, nothing. Just rolled in and started paving their own convenience route like they were annexing territory. I got out and walked the entire stretch, boots crunching over fresh gravel, seeing deep tracks from cement trucks and excavators already burned into the surface. They hadn't just tested access, they were actively using it. That's the part that got me. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Somebody looked at my land and said, "Yeah, we'll just use this guy's property until he complains." I called the number on the Cedar Creek Estate sign before I even made it back to my porch. Brent answered on the second ring, sounding weirdly relaxed, like he already knew why I was calling. I said, "You built a road across my field." He laughed a little, not nervous either, more like amused, then goes, "It's temporary access for our crews, man, no big deal." No big deal. I swear some people hear themselves talk and still think they're the reasonable one in the conversation. I told him, "That road is on my property." He says, "Well, our engineers believe that strip may have been part of an old access easement." May have been. That phrase right there told me everything. They didn't know. They guessed. And instead of checking first, they gambled with somebody else's land because slowing down construction costs money. I told him there was no easement, because when I bought the property, the title company checked every inch of that deed. Clean title, no access rights, no shared usage agreements, nothing. Brent got quiet for a second, then switched tones completely, started talking to me like I was the unreasonable one. "Look," he said, "we're improving the area here. Property values are going to go up. This development benefits everybody." I remember standing there looking at that gravel scar carved through my field thinking, benefits everybody except the person you're stealing from. That's when I realized this wasn't some misunderstanding. Brent genuinely believed he was too important to ask permission. See, guys like that spend enough time throwing money around. Eventually they stop hearing the word no. They convince themselves that smaller property owners will just roll over because fighting back takes time and money. And honestly, most people do roll over because taking on a developer feels like stepping in front of a train. They've got attorneys, contractors, county connections, deadlines, investors. Meanwhile, you're just one guy standing in a field looking at a road that wasn't there yesterday. But something about the way Brent talked to me lit a fire in my chest. It wasn't just arrogance, it was entitlement. Like my land existed purely to solve his problem. That night, I barely slept. Every time headlights passed across my bedroom window, I imagined another truck driving over my property, another crew acting like my field belonged to them now. By sunrise, I'd already made up my mind. If Brent wanted to fight over that road, I was going to give him one he'd never forget. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where a lot of people get trapped, especially in small towns where developers come in flashing money and acting like expansion automatically gives them authority. According to standard procedure, no builder should ever touch private land without verified easement documentation, written access agreements, or county-approved right-of-way records. That stuff gets checked before construction even begins, because once equipment crosses onto somebody else's property, you're no longer talking about miscommunication. You're talking about liability. From a legal perspective, Brent's biggest mistake wasn't building the road. It was assuming inconvenience would pressure me into surrendering my rights afterward. That happens all the time. Developers know most homeowners panic at the thought of legal fees, so they create momentum first, then act like reversing the damage would be unreasonable. This is a psychological trap because suddenly the victim feels guilty for holding up progress, even though the entire problem started with trespassing in the first place. And the craziest part? Society often rewards confidence over legality. If somebody in a clean polo shirt says, "We're improving the community," people instinctively treat resistance like selfishness. But property law doesn't care about confidence, charm, or projected profits. The lesson here is simple. If somebody ignores your boundaries once and gets away with it, they usually come back bigger the second time. That's why I knew if I let Brent keep that road for even another week, eventually it wouldn't feel temporary anymore. The next morning I called my attorney, an older guy named Wade Harper who looked permanently annoyed even when he was in a good mood. Wade had spent 30 years handling land disputes around eastern Tennessee, and the second I explained what happened, he actually stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Tell me you took pictures before calling them." Luckily I had. Tire tracks, gravel piles, equipment marks, all time-stamped on my phone. Wade let out this little satisfied grunt and said, "Good, because people like this always rewrite history once lawyers get involved." By noon we had copies of my deed, county plats, title reports, everything proving there was no recorded easement crossing my land. Not even close. Brent's road existed for one reason only, because he decided it was convenient. Wade drafted a formal cease and desist letter demanding immediate removal of the road and full restoration of my field within 10 business days. Real clean language too, professional, direct, basically the legal equivalent of saying, "Take your mess and get off my property." We sent it certified mail and by hand delivery. And you'd think that would have slowed them down, right? Nope. Brent doubled down. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of diesel engines outside my house before 7 in the morning. I looked out my kitchen window and saw dump trucks rolling across the gravel strip like they owned the place. Cement mixers, framing crews, pickup trucks with subcontractor logos. It actually got busier after the legal notice, almost like Brent wanted to establish dominance through momentum. Like if enough activity happened fast enough, eventually the situation would become too complicated to reverse. That's another thing developers understand. People tolerate illegal behavior once enough money gets attached to it. A half-finished subdivision creates pressure. Investors get nervous. Contractors start calling county officials. Everybody suddenly acts like stopping the violation is somehow more disruptive than committing it. Brent was betting I'd fold under that pressure. Problem was, he misread me completely. Wade filed for trespass and injunctive relief before the week ended. We weren't asking for money yet. We wanted the road shut down immediately. And let me tell you, seeing Brent for the first time in court explained everything about the guy. Perfect haircut, expensive watch, 10 loafers with no socks. Looked like somebody who practiced smiling in mirrors before networking events. He shook hands with people like he was campaigning for office. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there in work boots and a faded flannel shirt feeling like I tracked dirt into a country club. Brent's attorney tried spinning the whole thing as a misunderstanding. Claimed the rear parcel had no practical highway access. Claimed construction timelines were already underway. Claimed their engineers believed historical access rights may have existed. May have existed again. Amazing how confident people sound while admitting they never verified anything. Then came the argument that really pissed me off. Brent's lawyer actually said, blocking access now would cause substantial economic harm to an important residential development project serving the community. Serving the community. There it was again, that polished little trick where private profit gets wrapped in public virtue. Like luxury homes with decorative mailboxes were somehow a humanitarian mission. Wade stood up afterward calm as ever and said, Your Honor, practicality does not create ownership rights. Short, simple, surgical. The judge leaned back in his chair, flipped through the paperwork for maybe 30 seconds, then looked directly at Brent and said words I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. Convenience is not a legal doctrine. Man, the silence after that hit harder than yelling ever could. The judge granted the injunction immediately. No further use of my property. Full stop. Brent's company had 14 days to remove the gravel road and restore the land to its original condition. Case closed, or at least I thought it was. 14 days came and went. Nothing changed. The truck slowed down for a few days after court, then gradually started sneaking back onto the road again, like raccoons testing whether the porch light still worked. Wade filed enforcement paperwork on day 15, but honestly, by then I was done waiting around for Brent to suddenly discover respect for boundaries. So I made a decision. If Brent wanted access so badly, I'd make sure he understood exactly who controlled it. I hired a fencing contractor out of Knoxville and ordered the heaviest steel farm gate they had in stock. Not some cheap chain-link swing gate either. I'm talking thick galvanized steel mounted onto concrete set posts deep enough to survive a tornado. Industrial lock, reinforced hinges, the whole deal. We installed it right where the gravel road entered from the county highway. Then, just to make sure nobody tried driving around it through the grass, I had a shallow trench dug across the inside portion of the road along my property line. Entire setup took less than a day. Honestly, watching that gate swing shut for the first time felt weirdly satisfying, like hearing the final click of a deadbolt after somebody's been trying your front door for weeks. The next morning was beautiful. I made coffee early and sat on my porch before sunrise waiting to see what would happen. Around 7:30, the first convoy showed up, 3 dump trucks followed by a concrete supplier. One by one they rolled toward the entrance, then stopped. Brake lights glowing red in the morning fog. Drivers climbing out confused. A couple workers walked up to the gate rattling it like maybe confidence alone would unlock steel. Then came the phone call. Brent sounded furious right out of the gate, breathing hard. Voice tight like he'd been yelling before dialing my number. You're shutting down an entire subdivision over a temporary access road, he snapped. I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. No, I told him. You shut down your subdivision the second you built on land you didn't own. He started threatening lawsuits immediately, talking about lost revenue, project delays, contractor penalties. Funny thing about threats, though, they lose a lot of power after a judge already ruled against you. I told him the gate stays until the court says otherwise, then hung up before he could launch into another speech about community progress. And that's when the real damage started hitting him. Without legal access to the development site, the county froze additional permit approvals. Inspectors wouldn't sign off on infrastructure phases. Suppliers got nervous. Contractors started demanding revised schedules. Investors hate uncertainty, and Brent suddenly had uncertainty pouring gasoline all over his timeline. Within 3 weeks, he was back in court asking for emergency relief, basically begging the judge to force temporary access through my land until they figured something else out. Denied. Completely denied. The judge looked exhausted just hearing the case again. At one point, he actually asked Brent, why would this court reward continued noncompliance? Which is judge language for, are you seriously still doing this? That's when Brent finally realized he'd boxed himself into a corner. See, the rear parcel technically did have another possible access point, but it required buying a narrow strip of land from a different neighboring property owner on the far east side. Problem was, that route needed fresh engineering plans, drainage redesign, and county approval. Also, Once word spread about Brent's situation, that neighbor suddenly understood his land was worth a whole lot more than before. Last I heard, Brent paid over $90,000 just for that skinny access strip alone. Then came redesign costs, delayed contracts, permit revisions, legal fees, idle equipment expenses. The numbers started stacking up fast. 6 figures easy, maybe more. And the cherry on top? He still had to pay contractors to remove every ounce of gravel from my field and restore the land back to grade. I watched crews scrape that road away piece by piece under court order, and I swear the irony tasted sweeter than barbecue sauce. Same company that bulldozed onto my property without permission, now spending months and thousands of dollars erasing their own arrogance from my land. By the time Cedar Creek Estates finally opened, nearly a year behind schedule, I'd become this weird local cautionary tale among contractors and developers around the county. Apparently, my name started coming up during planning meetings anytime somebody suggested temporary access shortcuts. And honestly, I'm perfectly okay with that. Looking back now, the craziest part of the whole situation isn't the road, or the lawsuit, or even the money Brent lost. It's how normal everybody acted in the beginning. That's what really sticks with me. The contractors driving across my field looked completely comfortable. The engineers clearly never panicked. Brent talked like I was being dramatic for objecting. Nobody involved behaved like they were doing something outrageous, which tells you a lot about how power works in situations like this. People with money and momentum start believing resistance is just an obstacle to manage, not a right to respect. And honestly, that mindset shows up everywhere now, not just in land disputes. HOAs do it. Developers do it. Even certain city officials do it sometimes. They rely on exhaustion. They assume regular people won't fight back because fighting takes energy, paperwork, patience, and usually money. According to standard procedure, property rights are supposed to be crystal clear. But in the real world, enforcement often depends on whether the owner is willing to become a problem. That's the uncomfortable truth nobody likes talking about. From a legal perspective, I probably would have had an easier life just accepting a settlement early on, maybe letting Brent lease temporary access while construction finished. A lot of people told me exactly that. Take the money. Don't drag this out. You can't stop development anyway. But that completely missed the point. The issue stopped being about gravel pretty fast. It became about precedent. Because once somebody learns they can ignore your boundaries without consequences, they stop seeing you as an equal participant. They start seeing you as manageable. This is a psychological trap a lot of homeowners fall into. They confuse avoiding conflict with maintaining peace. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes avoiding conflict just teaches aggressive people that pressure works. And the wild part is, once I finally pushed back hard, the entire illusion collapsed almost immediately. Brent wasn't unstoppable. His company wasn't untouchable. The county didn't magically side with whoever had the bigger budget. The system actually worked, eventually. Slowly, expensively, frustratingly, but it worked. The lesson here is that documentation matters more than emotion. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I won because the deed was clean, the evidence was clear, and Brent made the mistake of assuming confidence could substitute for permission. That's why I always tell people now, know exactly what you own. Keep records. Read your title reports. Understand easements before problems happen, not after. Because by the time bulldozers show up, you're already playing defense. And maybe the funniest part of all this? Brent could have avoided the entire disaster with one simple conversation. Seriously, if the guy had knocked on my door in the beginning and respectfully asked for temporary access, maybe we could have worked something out. Maybe not, but at least there would have been mutual respect involved. Instead, he treated my property like a minor inconvenience standing in the way of profit, and that arrogance cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars plus a year of delays. All because he couldn't stand hearing the word no. So yeah, whenever I drive past Cedar Creek Estates now and see those polished entrance signs and identical little houses lined up in perfect rows, I always think about that steel gate. Somewhere underneath all that development is a very expensive reminder that private property still means something. At least for now. And trust me, after this whole mess, nobody's building another road across my land without asking first. So let me ask you something. If you came home one day and found construction crews using your property like it belonged to them, would you fight back, or would you take the money and move on?